spending all that time in Ethereum world, yes, there's this roll-up thing happening over there in this L2 roadmap, which is, how people are trying to scale Bitcoin. But the difference is you have more expressivity on Ethereum. So everything's homogeneous. You have rollups and, alt DA rollups, which are validiums and optimiums. This is very simple, relatively speaking. And then you go over to Bitcoin scaling and it's a total mess because there are like 15 or so unique architectures and styles of scaling solution because of all the restrictions.
Introduction. Read from Bitcoin Layers. That's how I was introduced to you, but I think based on your intro, I think there's a lot more complexity to where you've come from and where you guys are going. You don't have a token, you don't have a protocol per se. You guys are essentially in the research side of things, which is quite unique because we generally approach things, from founders and what they're doing. And here we have, I don't know, more of a purist approach. That's the way I see it. That's not something that you said to me or that anyone said to me. So, yeah, for anyone who's listening, welcome to a Blockmates Orange. Red, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like I said at the start, it's like I really do want to explore the complexities of how we identify the different Bitcoin layers that exist at the moment. And more importantly, are there classifications? What are the complexities around that? And I think you kind of inadvertently gave us a good intro, but let's do an intro on your background and what brought you here. How long have you been in the space for? Yeah, what's your journey been like? Tell us.
Totally, thank you. So yeah, I'm Red from Bitcoin Layers. I co-founded LX Research Labs, and Bitcoin Layers is one of our products, which is, in the simplest way to explain it, a dashboard explaining the trust assumptions and risks of different Bitcoin scaling solutions. But my background, as I mentioned before, didn't really start in Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the first general introduction to like crypto at large. I used Bitcoin for the first time in like 2015, and I thought that's cool, but I thought it was just money. I didn't know it was more than money, so I was like, that's cool, but I'm not really going to pay attention. And then I started to pay attention in maybe 2020, and at this point, I'm working as a software engineer. My background is in systems engineering, and a friend is like, "Yo, Red, can you make me an NFT?" And I'm like, "I don't know what that is." But that was enough to get me to go down the rabbit hole. And I realized this is not just currency. This is social coordination wrapped in a little technology. And I thought it was awesome. And I said, wait, you can do more stuff than just send money. Like this is actually just this kick-ass database that is the most secure one on the planet. And that made me get involved. So in 2020, I started doing a lot of writing. Every time I learned about something, I wrote about it. And I was just like dev mercenary for hire, working on, whatever I came across that looked interesting. And that kind of went down my research arc. So I spent 2 years at Masari, about 2 years as a research analyst after, just like little dev jobs, teaching Solidity, smaller things. And that brought me to spending less time intellectually on Ethereum and more time to Bitcoin. So I kind of came home eventually. Ordinals showed me that Bitcoiners want added functionality and more expressivity. And then BitVM just made it all seem really exciting. So like those two events really pulled me into Bitcoin world. I'm totally still a shitcoiner. I'm not anti-token or anything like that, but that's how I got to here. That's how I got to Bitcoin. And I linked up with Janus and we said, no one knows what anything is. We barely know what anything is. Let's start adding some clarity to this very opaque space because it's this huge opportunity, right? It deserves that clarity. I thought this was a moment too big to ignore of programmability and like other forms of scaling coming to Bitcoin, or at least like the demand being clear that added functionality was there. So we thought, this is really dangerous. There's a lot of money on the line. We need to make sure people are using safe things.
Cool. So, I mean, there's obviously relevance. It's like I think from our side, from the research side of things, and fun and games aside, it's like I think the most important thing is like when we write about stuff and when we talk about stuff, like one of the really important criteria is like, is it something that firstly provides value to, the audience. Like, it's not just like this, hit and run, pump and dump, even though, we don't always get it right, and we kind of like maybe do like a misread on a situation. I think generally we get it right. And I think obviously the research that you guys do adds tremendous value in that whole thing. I don't know if you guys have had similar kind of feedback from the Masaris and the rest of it, but I mean, this is the kind of stuff that affords the opportunity for people to get a perspective on what's going on. And I think the big question for me, and it's been around for a while, is like, what is the point of kind of like this almost like this next level to Bitcoin? And the answer seems to be quite simple, like, okay, well, we're scaling it, we're making it more useful, and the whole thing. But is it really that? Is there something else there? Obviously, quite a big question, but I think this is what I think a lot of people are asking, and more importantly, like, you've got, like the maxis who are saying, well, it is fine the way that it is, and then, your innovators and your crazies are saying, no, we need to take this thing further. So just your thoughts around that would be great.
Yeah, I hear that point in that, like, okay, it works really well, but I don't think being first, like, I don't think Bitcoin is preordained for success. Like, I think it absolutely can be usurped. I mean, this industry is 15 years old. Like, this sector of cryptocurrency at large is not very old. I don't think its success is preordained. I think Bitcoiners have to, you know, make it deserve to survive. It has to improve. And right now, it can't scale to that degree. If everyone on the planet was using Bitcoin, you could send one transaction every 13 or 15 years. I did a little DA analysis on like bytes per transaction, 576 megabytes a day, however many billion people we have. Like, cool, you get one every 10 to 15 years. Like, it's not very usable in that sense. And I think this is something that absolutely has to exist. It has to.
Yeah.
So that's the reason that I'm so interested in scaling solutions, is that I don't want to, overhaul Bitcoin. You could go do that on another network if you'd like to. I want to use this network for what it is, the security layer, and just secure more with it. And that can be in other execution environments and such. But I think it has to change because, or something, or the scaling environment has to change such that people can use it. Because we will use a world where, okay, even if we adopt Bitcoin, everyone's using ETFs or centralized solutions. Like, you can just hope, yeah, at some point, we'll figure it out. We'll be using something else. But if you think about, like, this is real life, like, we could just end up back in an even more dystopian world, because now there is no cash. Now everything is on chain and verifiable. There is no privacy in your funds. And that could happen if we don't figure out scaling and everything goes to custodial solutions. Like, that is a possible outcome in our, tree of the future. So, like, I don't know, it's kind of scary when you think of it that way. Like, we need to make sure this works, because if it doesn't, it would be worse than what we had before.
Yeah. Well, we obviously have seen the privacy scenario play out. I mean, very topical with Telegram quite recently, and then obviously, what happened with Monero, and obviously central exchanges delisting, and there definitely is a resistance to the whole idea of privacy. And I mean, obviously, there's a huge discussion in that, but like, does Bitcoin potentially go down that road where it does almost have a scaling solution that factors in a Monero style privacy, or do you think that's maybe a little bit too far fetched? I know we're going off piste here, but yeah, you
Yeah,
just got me
I'm
thinking around.
very happy to talk privacy. I'm glad we went down this route. We will inevitably see more privacy focused scaling solutions. If you can build other scaling solutions, you can build private ones. And the problem with people is that, like, we are very reactive. We're not very proactive,
Mm,
just as a species. So, like, you don't really want privacy until you need it. But once you need it, it's too late. You
yeah.
had to be using it back then. So ideally, we almost like sneak it in
Mm,
at the infrastructure level of some scaling solution. like, that's like a perfect world where everything's private by default. And that's the reason some of the Monero people are like, oh, Zcash isn't private by default. And some of the Zcash people are like, well, Monero is probabilistic. So like, yes, there's the privacy feuds over there. But as you said, like, what we've seen with Telegram, this is not the first time we've seen someone, working in tech arrested for building something. I mean,
Yeah.
CoinJoin stuff, Tornado Cash stuff. Like there's been a lot of this. Telegram is just not a crypto product. It's a lot more mainstream, but it's encryption that is, I think, being misunderstood as a concept by legislators. Like that's the issue. I think, you know, we're going to get private scaling solutions. You can't stop anyone from building them. Like you live by the permissionless protocol, you die by it. It's going to happen.
Yeah. So just onto kind of like the Bitcoin layers project that you guys are busy with. Obviously that's just to kind of like rewind a little bit. It's essentially a dashboard that essentially broadcasts and announces that these are the Bitcoin layers that exist, and this is what their functionality is, and this is what their kind of like their safety. Well, is it a safety thing? Just give us a breakdown in terms of what the primary objective of Bitcoin layers is.
Yeah. So I would say it's not safety because safety can be a little more nuanced, but it will lay out your custody assumptions.
Okay.
So everyone has a different threshold for what they're willing to do. Some people are cool with Coinbase. I'll leave my BTC on there. Some people are cool with Cashew. I'm going to use this centralized mint. Maybe a centralized mint is still too centralized for me. I'll go use Fedi Mint. And now we have a group, a federation. Maybe I'll use Lightning, and I can withdraw whenever I'd like with my own node, Lightning with an LSP, or just self custody. And everyone has their own threshold on this scale of what they're comfortable with using and where they're comfortable putting their funds. Now, in the scope of an L2, we've kind of identified a few points where, like, hey, you should look at bridge custody. You should look at your settlement, like your network operators. There are just like a few areas that we've kind of highlighted, and we kind of have like a scoring, like a yellow, green, red, or critical if you're closed source and we really can't verify. But kind of putting like a stamp on what assumptions are in place here. I mean, how many people are you actually trusting, or how many entities are you trusting to go use this service? Because it's great if, this network says, hey, I'm a roll up. I do this, here's Bitcoin DeFi, but if it's completely centralized, while I'm at it, Bitcoin rollups don't exist today. There are none. We have L2s like Lightning, but the vast majority of layers, the ever ambiguous word layer, are a lot of sidechains. And that's not a knock on the people building them. They're building the best things available with today's technology, with roadmaps that, hey, if we get this killer BitVM implementation, we're going to have a better bridge. And, maybe we can work with some fraud proofs and other things to like enforce the validity of transactions because you're doing them elsewhere. So it's not Bitcoin insuring them. But, teams are moving in that direction. They're just not all there right now. So we're kind of trying to outline, hey, these are your options, but know what you're using. It's everyone's cool with the different levels of custody. That's per person. Just know what it is because everyone markets. I'm an L2. Everyone says they're an L2, and the word means nothing when all of these different architectures claim to be that.
So I find that to be probably the single most interesting thing at the moment in terms of this discussion, just because it's convenient to label a project as an L2. It's kind of like, well, it's almost like they want to be an L2, the same way that there is this association with Ethereum and the true, in inverted commas, L2s that exist on that. Well, we do know that they are L2s because they are inherently connected. What makes an EVM L2 an EVM L2, and what makes a Bitcoin L2 in inverted commas a sidechain?
So what I draw as the line in the most simplistic way is, do you have unilateral exits? And that could be misleading the deeper you get into it, but I think on the surface that is like the test. And unilateral exit means, can I take my money out of it without anyone's permission?
Yeah.
If I want to take my money out of a Lightning channel, I go submit a transaction to close it.
Hmm.
And yeah, there's a challenge window. I don't get it out this second. I got to wait for my counterparty to come in. They have time. And if I lied, if I sent you a BTC and then I go to close the channel and I submit the state before I sent that, then maybe you gave me these services I paid for and I'm trying to steal it. So like you have your time to you know contest that claim, but I don't need anyone's permission. Even yours, if you're trying to fight me, like if I'm posting something valid, I'm going to get my money out. And that's kind of how bridges work on a proper rollup on Ethereum. If I want to take my money out, I just interact on Ethereum. I don't ever need to send a transaction on L2.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're aiming for, because you can deal with a federated custodian, you can deal with a multi-sig. I need 11 out of 15 to sign. Um, an honest minority, maybe there's 20 people involved, but if just one of them is honest, they can get me my money back. And BitVM is kind of in this one of n category with its operators and verifiers. And then the holy grail of this is the unilateral exits. So like that feature there is what's really important. When you go a little deeper, it's also enforcing transaction validity. So like when I go and submit on Lightning, we talked about if it's valid, if there's no state that came after this, and you'd be able to prove that. Like, is this transaction valid? Like, so that's Bitcoin enforcing that your Lightning transactions were valid, because the UTXOs that went in, the same amount has to come out, however it's split up. What goes in is what comes out. And Bitcoin is the one enforcing that, not some other node software. So those features are, I'd say, at the core what really defines what an L2 is. And you are saying that, you did say before how like everyone wants to say they are one. I think all
Yes.
these networks want to be one. It's just no one's figured out the secret sauce, or it's not possible with the tools at hand. But I don't know. I don't knock it too much. It's kind of like brevity
Yeah.
over nuance, which makes sense in some places, but that's brevity over nuance is not our motto over at Bitcoin Layers. We are in for the nuance.
Well, clearly you are, and I mean, I want to just bring up the website. So for anyone who is listening in and you aren't watching, the website is bitcoinlayers.org, and it's it seems to be a really simple website, but it actually isn't. It's actually quite it's quite involved and quite in depth. In that, what it does is that it essentially illustrates or demonstrates the different Bitcoin layers that do exist, obviously, and it then has certain risk criteria where it looks at the obviously the bridging capability, which is obviously a big thing not only in EVM but clearly in Bitcoin as well, because it is a sidechain L2 depending on which hill you want to die on. Um, Even though I tend to agree with you on this one, Red, on the whole kind of like sidechain versus L2, you explained it really well. And then obviously the different kind of like the data availability, the network operators, the settlement assurance. And the only one that actually scores green on all is, interestingly enough, Lightning Network. And I
It's the
wanted
only
to just go.
L2.
Pardon?
Yeah, it is the only L2.
Yes. Okay. So it is the only L2. Okay. So, but yet, if you ask a lot of people, they turn around and they say that the Lightning Network hasn't been successful. Could we just like briefly discuss like why people perceive it to have been unsuccessful, even though it has all the right ingredients according to the way that you guys have approached this?
I think two reasons, or there are two answers to why Lightning Network is sometimes considered unsuccessful. For the first, let me ask you, when you think about Bitcoin scaling, are you interested in using BTC, the asset, in alternative ways? Are you interested in using BTC, the asset, for cheaper? Or are you interested in extending what the Bitcoin network can do? Because BTC, the asset, and Bitcoin, the network, are almost two different technologies.
It's actually a really good question. I think I think it's a combination of possibly all three of those.
Yeah.
So kind of like this perceived value, the fact that I can actually use it as a payment instrument, and obviously the security of the network. So I think for me, it's all of the above.
Awesome. So I think certain people only sit in one or two of those camps. I, like you, kind of sit in all of those. I love that with ordinal theory, you now have a way to use Bitcoin as a database, a dynamic, write only database. I can do recursive inscriptions and keep adding to this list. I can post, images or news on here that I know it's not going anywhere. That's not sending money. That's expanding the capabilities. I'm using this database. I'm not using BTC this money. So like kind of different things there.
Yeah.
And a lot of layers, L2s, want to add more programmability, more expressiveness. That's kind of like the main focus, I'd say, of many of them that I'm seeing just ethos wise. And that's not what Lightning does. What Lightning does is you can send BTC for cheaper.
Yeah.
You can, yeah, you can save money this way and save fees and have more people involved just based on the fees and how many transactions fit in a block. You still need an L1 transaction, which I think is a huge bottleneck. But that's one of the reasons is that Lightning Network does not add any functionality. It just increases the throughput of what is already there, which is transfers. So that's maybe one reason people are not seeing Lightning as the success or as the L2 that they want, because it
Mm.
only checks, one, maybe two of those several boxes we discussed. The other reason is UX. My mom's never going to run a Lightning node. Like, she's not doing that. I mean, most Bitcoiners that like live this life aren't going to run one. They're going to use an LSP, and that's just like that's the reality of people are going to use what's convenient. What's convenient, like centralization is awesome for convenience. You can move really fast. You can update things like you put your fail safes in check. I don't have to worry about my node going down. Like that's cool. That's great for many cases, but it's not really the core crypto ethos of full sovereignty. And I know you can run your own node. That's why we have a green score for data availability, because you are your own data availability, or you can be. Most people don't do that. They say, I'm going to go let some centralized service do it for me, like, which is valid. That's what you want to do. Maybe you're not keeping your life savings on there. Sure, that works. But it's not, like what you can possibly do with Lightning in terms of security assumptions and how solid it is not the average user behavior, I would say. People default to centralized solutions. So that's why I think people kind of want something that the path of least resistance is the sovereign path, not the centralized LSP.
So is there a possibility, and I don't know if this is kind of like your speciality or your specialization, but is there a capability that the Lightning Network can do all these other so-called nice to haves over and above what it already does, or is it kind of limited in its functionality?
So inherently, the secret sauce of the Lightning Network that lets you have unilateral exits is HTLCs, and that's just a built-in smart contract by default. The problem is, one, you're using a UTXO system which doesn't have global state. So like there's two like primary accounting models you'll see on crypto networks, like the UTXO model and the account-based model. And the UTXO model I love because it's more scalable. You just have like a smaller state, like you don't have this global state. Privacy is easier because you destroy and create notes. It's lighter to run a node typically when you're going like through your UTXO set. It's nice. Like your UTXOs are ephemeral and it helps in many ways, but it's not very intuitive for coding things that are like global states, like building these other functionalities. Like it gets pretty wonky when you're using UTXOs. You can look at the many stateful UTXOs of like Cardano's EU UTXOs and Alephium and Radix and all these models where people cram global state into UTXO, and it is pretty wonky. So Lightning inherits the UTXO accounting model from Bitcoin, and that makes it a little bit harder to build these other things. But also within HTLC, it's two ways. It's a counterparty. It's you and I open one. It's not everyone is using this channel. And yes, you connect channels, you route liquidity. I have a channel with you, and you've got a channel with Danny. So through you, I can transact with Danny, or but it's still different from global state. And that makes like an AMM or like all the DeFi things people like, it makes those very difficult to do. But also when I'm settling at the end of the day, I'm settling a pure Bitcoin transaction. When I close that channel, we're closing a UTXO, and Bitcoin only knows how to resolve BTC and UTXOs. It does not know how to resolve Tether if I have Tether in my channel somehow.
Yeah.
There are some ideas like Taproot assets, which honestly I don't think I'm brushed up on that enough to speak on it. But there are ideas like, Taro gets into that, like how, or LRC20s I've even seen, like how can we, with meta protocols or some other way, represent other assets in our channels. It's just the validity part, the closing the channel using Bitcoin to ensure the validity of this state transition. That part is not just in Bitcoin's wheelhouse. It doesn't know how to do that, so it kind of can't.
Interesting. In terms of the other layers that have been created and the rest of it, what I found really interesting, and you guys have also obviously listed the amount of Bitcoin that are present on those relevant layers / networks. And I was quite surprised to see that Stacks doesn't really have that much Bitcoin present, and it's been around obviously the longest. What is your take on kind of like the Stacks ecosystem? And they've obviously been around for a very long time. Have you kind of like checked it out and kind of got a feel for what it is that they're doing on the network?
Yeah, so Stacks was something I was learning about before I took my, nosedive into BTC world and got orange pilled. But they do not have as much TVL because they do not have an enshrined BTC bridge. And by enshrined BTC bridge, I
Yeah.
mean they don't have a bridge that's cooked into their consensus mechanism. So if you look at some other networks, they're not third party bridges. It's like this bridge is part of the protocol itself. Like RBTC is enshrined in rootstock. Like that's what you're using for fees. That's part of the network. And they have their PowPeg federation that handles bridging of it, but Stacks does not have that yet. Stacks just had their Nakamoto release, I believe, yesterday, so it's not live. But I think what the update will be is finalized. I don't know what block it's happening for them at, but that's one of the steps for them to have SBTC, which would be their native enshrined BTC. And in all cases, like pegging out to another network, super easy. You send BTC to a multisig or a threshold signature wallet, and you just have a light node on the other network that checks Bitcoin. And it's really easy to say, yep, that's sent in there, and it's got this op return that says to this address, mint BTC. Pegging it out, like taking your BTC out of the layer back into Bitcoin, that's always the hard part. But SBTC uses like a version of light nodes, and that might change it because right now they have XBTC and ABTC, which are third party, more on the centralized end bridges. So there is no like Stacks enshrined BTC. There's just Alex, that's a DEX that does some other services. They have one, and there's another there, but these are third parties. It's not the network itself. It's not like Rootstock's RBTC. So I think that's maybe some of the hesitation on people saying, I trust Stacks, but what if I don't know the specific people issuing these BTC tokens on Stacks? Because it's not Stacks, the network, issuing them. It's third parties.
Okay. So that is obviously a risk. And I mean, in terms of the list that you guys have, you obviously, like in terms of the bridge custody, you guys have pretty much labeled everyone that's listed here, besides obviously the Lightning Network, as high high risk from that perspective. I want to just, I mean, obviously, I've your highest TVL that's listed here is, well, not your TVL, but the highest TVL that is listed here is obviously the Merlin Chain at 14,423. But they basically have a risk category of red for bridge custody, data availability, network operator, and settlement assurance. Comments on Merlin? I mean, for me, that's like a little bit concerning that, we're actually seeing, like red on all four of these kind of like criteria, but yet they've got the highest TVL. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I'm writing the Python scripts that check the BTC wallets. That BTC is in there, but my thoughts there are points programs like Merlin has a token already out. People I think are very excited at this prospect of BTC L2s, like fully expressive ones. So you have a lot of people wanting to try them. You have a lot of people wanting airdrops and things like that. So you have a lot of people trying to be first movers in this area, like as users, like be early, get involved. The trust assumptions, like we're marking them as red. We're being harsh for a purpose. Like we're not trying to say, whatever's the best right now is green. Like, yeah, your multi-sig's good enough. We're almost like suggesting like, okay, multi-sigs can get by, but I'm not in this industry for multi-sigs, and eventually everything kind of boils down to that. It's either reputation or validity proofs. But yeah, it's not so much better than anything else you're dealing with in terms of programmable environments. There is a lot of TVL on Merlin. I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but I don't think like what we consider like a high custody risk is something that would stop most users from depositing. Well, I guess it would stop most users. It would not stop most people that use Bitcoin layers in general, like all of these networks. Most of the BTC that exists is not in WBTC. It's not in, like TBTC, I think is one of the, like cooler models that I'm interested in. It's not in their bridge. It's not in any of Merlin's. I think they have Solve and they have their own. The vast majority is untouched. Most people are not willing to bridge it, and 14,000 is a lot. But yeah, it's kind of hard to tell what the motivation there is there. It's an NPC, but that's kind of the best you can build right now for a programmable environment. It's not that people are willfully like, I'm running this in a hot wallet. It's you really cannot build much better right now. Like that's the issue. Is we don't know the answer to green scores for programmable environments.
I think it's really cool that you guys are strict about it. I mean, it's, you're obviously dealing with a large amount of money, and there needs to be like clear comms and like clarity around what the hell is going on and where the risk parameters lie, irrespective of whether you agree with the risk parameters. That's the way you guys have identified them. Second highest TVL in the list is Core. Obviously, we're a big fan of Core. They sponsor the Blockmates Orange show, and at the same time, they also, they're not scared to kind of like take on a red score. I'm sure around obviously the bridge custody aspect of it, and I want to just kind of go back to that aspect of your criteria and kind of like your risk assessment on this. How do Core address a red score to say a yellow or green score with regards to what they've built?
So, are you asking like what is Core's response? Maybe.
No, I think what is Core's like? How do they improve on that score in terms of like, yeah,
Yeah. So, some basics on how Core's BTC bridge works. And I'm going to pull it up to remind myself, but I wrote this one. Is that their core BTC, they have a series of roles that are like guardians and watchers and lockers. And like I mentioned with stacks, like the peg to the L2, the peg to the layer slash sidechain is very simple. Like light clients will do that. The peg back is the really hard part. So they put up collateral. and your core token is slashable. But if you're a misbehaving locker, like if you're the guy or the federation who, hey, I'm going to hold this BTC and I'll mint it there. I've got all these funds under terms that if I behave badly, if I do things I'm not supposed to, you can slash them. So I'm economically incentivized. Any rational actor, like, I'm going to lose money if I steal. Um, so that's not the way to go. So like, you have the economic incentives in place, and then you've also got watchers, which kind of like your oracles at this point, that they're checking the price. Do you still have enough collateral? This and that. So they have all these pieces in place. Like, their thought went into this. It's not
Yeah.
send BTC to anonymous core multi-sig. You don't know who's running it. You don't know who has the keys. Just send it, and trust me, bro, I'll send it back if you ask for it back. It's not like this rudimentary process, and it still has a red score even with all these steps in place. And our reasoning there is, again, we are trying to be idealists of, like, we don't want to settle. Like before, I was saying, like, if we're not careful, Bitcoin is going to fall into obscurity to other chains if you cannot onboard any more people, because
Yeah.
crypto in general will grow. More people will be using this tech, or it's going to all end up in federated custodians, or it's all going to be on Coinbase. And I love Coinbase, but I don't want all the BTC on there. So, like,
Yeah.
we're trying to be idealists in that, yes, a lot of work goes into these models, and generally it's not like you're just totally getting rugged, but we're still aiming for more. And what we're aiming for is not federated multi-sigs, which, like, federations is the name of the game with Bitcoin bridges. We want models closer to, instead of the honest majority, I was saying before, like the N of M, can we get to
Yeah.
the honest minority? Can we get to, you have one good actor? So, you've got your 20 lockers and signers and guardians, all of these roles. Let's say you've got 20 operators of this bridge. If just one of them is honest, I get my money back when I withdraw it. I don't need to rely on this whole network, or the majority of this network, playing nice. I don't need to rely on all these different roles. It's just with one action, with one person, if they submit a proof or something of the sort. And that would be more akin to like a BitVM model. And even better than that, can we get to the Lightning version? Or can we get to permissionless sets? Because we might have permissioned sets of members of Federation. And then, can we get from fraud proofs to validity proofs, which are even more secure? There's still a little reputation involved with a fraud proof, but in some models, with a validity proof, like, you're trusting math. Um, you know, how far can we get down the spectrum of custody and sovereignty? Like, how close can we get to that with the bridge? And yes, we have all these pieces in place, but still, like I said, we're being idealists. So even systems with all these stops and all these checks are falling to red scores based on our framework, which, for anyone listening, the framework is on the website, and everything's open source on this website. So feel free to join the conversation or make your own suggestions.
I think it's great. I mean, it's not really a matter of arguing. It's just like you said, there's got to be like this permissionless, trustless process where you interrogate the evidence that you have, and then you either come up with better suggestions or you make a whole lot of excuses as to why you've done it the way that you've done it, right? And maybe the excuses are technological limitation. Maybe the excuses are like, how do we actually keep our network safe from a custodial perspective and still, remain true and honest to the mission? But like you said, it's like, what if someone decides that they want to do things differently, like within the confines of a multi-sig? That's an issue. That's a problem. And we know that there's problems with multi-sigs. And I'm just curious how, and I think I'm coming back to the original question, is like, what would Core essentially land up having to do to kind of like make this thing as permissionless and as trustless as possible? Have they done it already, or is it? And it's not only a question around Core. I think it's for everyone that's on this list. Everyone that's on here has obviously got that challenge besides the Lightning Network. And I'm just
Yeah.
curious, is there a replication of the Lightning Network and how the way they do it in line with what everybody else is doing?
I think the best bet right now with the tools we have available today are BitVM style bridges. There's talks of, what if we could have covenants, which is adding some state to your transaction, really. Like, what if we could have statefulness in that state being, hey, I submitted this, I'm allowed to take it out under these conditions. That is
Yeah.
like state that the contract has to remember. Or what if we could have covenants with a CTV or a TX hash or a cat or these many opcodes that people explore? That would lead to better bridging solutions, but that's not in Bitcoin, and updating Bitcoin is not a trivial process. We have BitVM today. We don't have any BitVM bridges in production, but BitVM is an awesome strategy. I mean, another paper came out recently. The BitVM space is moving so fast. I think that is that is the most promising route to look at today for the sake of probably both bridging and state validation.
Okay.
Then DA becomes your big bottleneck. Every time you solve one problem, the next thing up is now the biggest problem. That will be DA at some point. But I'd say BitVM is probably the route to go down. It's just there is so much risk. Like you can't just launch a BitVM bridge right off the bat. Like there are a lot of teams working on this. Other ones that are looking at it, like Rootstock's got their BitVM X. Bob's looking at it. Citrea's looking at it. Alpin's looking at it. A lot of teams are looking into BitVM style bridges. There's a little bit of danger on being a first mover there. Like you're going to
Yeah.
kill your reputation if you screw up a bridge. People know
Yeah.
how to do MPC and threshold signatures and just multi-sig style things in general. Like this is familiar territory. BitVM's a little newer, so there is risk on just like we're going to launch it, which is why it's taking some time to get to production. But that's the route.
So that can you just explain kind of like the dynamic that exists between the EVM and the Bitcoin networks and how that kind of plays out and bringing the story
Totally.
together? Yeah.
So, um, yeah, the Ethereum virtual machine is the software, the OS that ETH runs on. And if you go on Binance, BNB chain, they have a version of the Ethereum virtual machine, but these are distinct. It's not Ethereum over there. It's just like we copied and pasted the software. So like when you hear EVM, when you hear Rootstock uses the EVM, it's not Ethereum. It's just the same software, which is often not clear to people like first getting into like VMs. Your VM is just your operating system. It's your Windows or Linux. Think of it like that. Like, what does your chain run on? And in Ethereum's case, you can write whatever the hell code you want. The only thing that's going to stop you, it is Turing complete, i.e., you can compute anything given enough space, but you don't have enough space. Like you hit like 4 billion gas, and like that's it for your transaction. Now on Bitcoin, parts of that are similar, parts are different. Bitcoin script is the virtual machine of Bitcoin. And you do contracts, like you write scripts. They're not like Ethereum contracts and that you're writing all this code. It's opcodes, just like very rudimentary basic instructions. It's like based on assembly, really, which is like very low level programming language. And you're just making conditions for like creating and destroying UTXOs. And it's just hey, if you can prove you've got the public key to this, then cool, you can spend it. Like sometimes it's that simple, but just very rudimentary things. You have limits though. So, like I said, you hit a limit of gas, that's all you can do. You have limits on Bitcoin. And some of them are from you don't have opcodes that express your functionality, and you can do workarounds. You can't do multiplication, so you can't do 5 times 10, but you can do 5 plus 5 10 times. But like things start to get pretty big and you have this limit. You can only have X amount of bytes and X amount of opcodes in a specific transaction. So you hit the ceiling pretty quick when you try to get funky. But you still do have this scripting functionality with Bitcoin script that parallels. It's like a smaller subset of what you can do to like an Ethereum. So I'd say that's kind of like the difference between these VMs. The idea of BitVM, Also, BitVM is an abstract. It is not a specific implementation. So people think BitVM and they're like, oh, is BitVM live? Is it launched? And, think of a stable coin. Like stable coins, like you don't say like, oh, is our stable coins live? USDC is a stable coin. It is live, like Super Testnet has an 8-bit CPU that uses BitVM. That BitVM implementation is live, but you wouldn't say BitVMs are live. So BitVM is like a concept, it's an idea, and you would have specific implementations. The most popular idea I'd say right now is bridging with it. But the BitVM strategy is, can I do some computation somewhere else and use Bitcoin transactions to enforce that it happened? So, I'm gonna put some money on the line. I got one BTC, right here in this contract, and the conditions on it are, if you can prove my execution wrong, you can take it. Like that's my collateral. And I'm gonna say I did this computation offline. I'm gonna represent it as a proof, like using basically like mathematical primitives to like represent execution in math, which it's like a validity proof. The idea is I'm going to go represent this. I'm going to go put it in a tap tree, and like here are all the steps, the inputs, outputs. You can go on your own computer, check my work, and if you think I'm wrong somewhere, it's deterministic. There's only one way it works. So if you can prove me wrong, you can take the money. And that's kind of the idea. I say, I'm going to be a good actor. I'm going to process bridge withdrawals. I'll be an operator, and I'm putting money on the line, or my reputation or something on the line, probably money. And I'm going to process these bridge withdrawals. And if you can prove that I didn't do what I said I was going to do, like I'm cut off access from the bridge funds. Like anyone can go verify and challenge me. So it's like this optimistic, like assume that I'm a good actor, like that's the optimistic part, but then you can challenge me and submit like a fault proof or fraud proof. So that's the BitVM idea. Do your computation somewhere else. Not exactly verified that a proof happened on chain, but like challenge it, post a representation of it on chain in terms that Bitcoin script understands.
Wow.
Did that make any sense? BitVM's hard to explain.
No, it did. It did make sense. What I got out of that is that essentially the one is a lot more kind of like almost simpler in its state versus a more complex state. And then there's obviously the communication between the two that is facilitated. I'm not entirely sure how the communication between the two are facilitated. So how does that exactly work? Because you essentially have two different states, right? And they've got to communicate
The
with one another.
communication between who and who?
Sorry, just repeat that. I've actually lost you there.
The communication between who and who. So this is the communication between.
Between EVM and BitVM.
Oh, so okay. So maybe I didn't explain that part correctly. BitVM is not inherently linked to the EVM, but you
Yes,
would be able to bridge to an EVM environment or bridge
yes,
to any environment. You could bridge to
yes.
Solana if you wanted, or bridge to Lightning. But that would, or you know, maybe bad example in that case. You would bridge to anywhere. What I'm proving in BitVM is that I have processed the withdrawal on Bitcoin. So it's kind of separate from the EVM in that sense. Like you would initiate a transaction on your EVM layer, and you would say, "Hey, I've got this layer BTC. I would like to cash it in here, burn it, and on Bitcoin, give you my BTC back. I want to get out." And what you're proving there with the BitVM operator is, did I give this person their BTC back? If I did give it back, I can pay myself back from the bridge funds. So that's kind of the idea. It's not that it's like a light client in between Ethereum and Bitcoin, or some EVM implementation of Bitcoin. It's not really a light client. It's more so, how do you prove that you were supposed to distribute this BTC, and then that you actually did it and actually sent it to the person who it belonged to?
Okay.
It's like
Um,
on-chain enforcement of the Federation saying, okay, here's your money back.
yeah, that
If there
makes
was a recourse on chain where I could say, hey, I can prove the Federation did not give me my money back after I asked for it, and then I can financially punish them
yeah.
for saying they were going to do it and they didn't, like that would be the situation.
Okay, gotcha. So where does this whole, I mean, in your opinion, like where does the whole space around obviously scaling Bitcoin go from here? I mean, obviously there's incredible momentum. We've seen this has definitely been a Bitcoin cycle, in every sense of the word, from price to adoption to attention, and obviously now these side chains and what it is that they are endeavoring to do. I mean, we see this incredible value that lies in Bitcoin, and I think the primary objective here is obviously replicate what has happened with Ethereum and collateral value and yields and all that kind of stuff. In your opinion, where do you see from a tech perspective, and I think more importantly, how does the tech facilitate where you think this goes from this point onwards?
So where I see us right now is that we have a lot of scaling solutions. I do not think they are sufficient in terms of trust assumptions and UX. I think what we have now, it can't be the end goal. And that's not to knock the teams they're building right now, because we have absolutely usable products. They're just not, that North Star, the coveted, oh, this would be perfect. This is, what we want in terms of UX and everything. I think what we want is censorship resistance, asset sovereignty, and no requirement of an L1 transaction, because at some point the requirement of an L1 transaction will start pricing out large chunks of the population. Uh, if we get a lot more people using it. So, like, looking at those three factors, I don't think we have anything that meets all three of those categories right now, which means like we need to improve something. And that's, I think, commonly understood between products, because everyone's looking in this direction. So we need better methods, whether it is BitVM, whether it is some other system. Yeah, like the conclusion is today, we don't have the scaling solutions that are going to take Bitcoin to everyday people, that are going to remove the friction. So yeah, our moms can use it and not have to go get an associate's degree in IT to run a node and understand trust assumptions. Like people shouldn't have to worry about what's on bitcoinlayers.org and trust assumptions in computer science terms. That should not be a factor at all. So the first half of your question, I think, was kind of like where we are, like what the state is now. The state now
Yeah.
is scaling solutions are not sufficient for onboarding the next billion, or whatever tagline is used.
Yeah, that's a good answer, and I think you are spot on. Yeah, I think the journey has definitely begun around this kind of like, I think Bitcoin for a very long time was quite one dimensional, and I mean obviously not wanting to throw shade on it, but it had very much a purpose around like secure network payments, and obviously like a derivation now of what we deem to be digital gold. That's another discussion, obviously, all on its own, and it's transcending that at the moment, and it's really interesting to see where the narrative is shifting and where we're going with this. And I'm looking forward to it, because I think at the end of the day, yeah, I'm in it for the tech. I know that you definitely are, and it's there's obviously the fun stuff, and we can all kind of like go and do the shit coining and the rest of it. But I think this is important, um, not only for the sake of money, but I think also for the sake of our progression as a species, and that's another topic of discussion as well. Um,
It
but
is
yeah, yeah,
the best we
it's
got
really,
for coordination.
it's really cool to obviously have a perspective that I would argue is quite an unbiased one. Yes, it might be deemed to be idealistic, like you so eloquently identified what it is that you guys are doing. But I think it's important to have that, because at the end of the day, code is always going to be idealistic, and it's great to try and emulate that within the mission that you have, which it seems you guys are. I mean, obviously there's going to be kind of like people are going to disagree, but I think it's important to have, a basis with which we can obviously start measuring things, and it's really cool to see that you guys are doing it. And yeah, appreciate the time, appreciate the insight. I could quite easily carry on for another hour or two. I think it's really fascinating, and more importantly, I think it's the substance with which this whole movement is going. It's kind of like, well, what does the tech allow us to do? What doesn't it allow us to do? And how do we progress from that point onwards? So anyways, I'm going to stop rambling now, and thank you for taking the time. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, and in many ways, a bit of a surprise. Like, we need more of these kind of discussions. There's too much focus on individual projects and products as opposed to, a holistic view around what people are doing.
Well, thank you for facilitating the discussion.
Cool. Yeah, Red, thanks a lot. Maybe we'll get you back in a year's time, and then we can kind of check in and see where it's all arrived at that point. Considering,
yeah, now and then.
Yeah. Cool. Take it easy. Thanks everyone for tuning in and listening. Please like and subscribe. And yeah, see you on the next episode of A Blockmates Orange. Take it easy.
All right, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a like, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on for next time. See ya.